in one day. So 3.7 million, probably it's more like 4 million people now in one day that go through Shinjuku. And this might be more specific to Paul, maybe this low density, high density issue is somewhat inseparable. We know that our energies come from this outer lower density areas that is sustaining the city. So how do we keep developing this density in conjunction to this kind of outer skirt? So this inseparable nature of city versus the suburbs or the exterior.
Well, if in a parallel, in a parallel answer, one of the interesting letters we got back from the letters we wrote to Japan, about a couple of weeks ago, we got a very nice letter from Mr. Mori, who's from Mori Building, who's obviously our client, and Roppongi Hills. And as you know, Roppongi Hills was developed, part of the concept of developing Roppongi Hills was to use the land more efficiently and increase density and create a different model for urban living. And so a couple of points that he made regarding the earthquake that I thought I could share with you. First of all, after the earthquake, Roppongi Hills continued to function very well, and because it was a mixed-use center, could offer be a place of refuge, obviously to the people that were stuck in the building, but also to the people in the neighborhood. And because of the large area of public space that was in the building. In addition to that, the building creates its own energy, or is a source of energy, as its own energy generator, and so it continued to provide energy continuously after the earthquake, despite the power outages in Tokyo. Maybe I'm sure there were other projects like that, but could also feed electricity back into the grid, so could provide positively for the city. So my feeling is that, you know, in reconstruction, but also as a sort of lesson to future development and using our resources carefully, it's better to look towards high density solutions rather than rebuilding low density use. And I'd be interested to know what the sort of feeling is in Japan relative to that from our other panelists.
Maybe I could pass this question to Rafael. The Tokyo International Forum actually is a designated government-assigned evacuation for 1,000 people. So it definitely worked as this emergency space. And we probably would like to hear how that design process actually happened, or how was it considered in the design phase to even think of this?
No, it wasn't. It was not. I mean, you know, it's a good public building, and I think that, as I said before, I think the code and the sort of level of attention of the construction companies in particular, but also the government, sort of are responsible for the successes that Paul mentioned before. And I'm sure, I mean, you know, the outstanding behavior of the Mediatheque is something completely, you know, for engineers probably it is a predictable thing. For us still trying to learn how these things move, I mean, you know, it sort of kind of makes it really magical. I thought that it was going to go like that, right? I mean, but it is a, I think the interesting thing, back to this question of density, is that also density in Japan is a completely different category than here, or in Europe for that matter. I mean, it's both a rural and an extraordinarily dense place. I mean, you know, the parameters and the sequence of transitions between, you know, suburbia and metropolitan life are much more frequent and much more uneven than in any other part of this country, for instance, where you kind of have the sense that at a certain point you're finishing to being in some place and moving into another place. My experience of Tokyo traveling in the country is that it is one very large thing, where there are pockets of greenery, pockets of places where the whole thing looks like if it was a village, but it is immediately overcome by these enormous projects, which are really the result of the need of handling such a large population and such a small footprint. What I think is interesting is that, and I think that that's really a sort of a Manhattan project, if you will. I mean, it's sort of like what happens in Venice in a way. Maybe this is a wake-up for understanding the need for major infrastructural work. I mean, this is not something that could be taken care of on the basis of just the building code or consciousness about the potential of choosing the most stringent restrictions rather than medium restrictions. This is something that I would like to see addressed almost in an engineering brief for the island and for the islands in a way. I mean, it was interesting to see the existent protection. This is all hindsight, by the way, so I mean, it sounds like if you were clever, but a 10-meter protection wall in front of a well-designed nuclear power plant. I was educated in meters, so 10 meters is a hell of a lot of a wall. And then when you have 15 and this whole thing destroys and produces this enormous cataclysm that we haven't seen the end of yet. And in particular, it looks like if there is a point, if there is a place, not a point, a place and a culture with a consensus about addressing macro-environmental problems is possible. It is in Japan, much more than in Venice. They will be fighting from now until the year 3000 about the color of the levees. I mean, but this is a remarkably sort of serious people. And they take a pride on their land that it is also kind of remarkable. I mean, we assume that dimension, expansion, geography is something beyond us. I mean, they have exhausted it, all of those things, many, many centuries ago. So what is left now is something that probably will come to us sooner or later, which is this idea that society and governments have a responsibility that at this point needs to completely redefine the limits of the discipline. This is not just an engineering project, it's an environmental project, it's a societal project, and it is more than anything an environmental project. I mean, could it be solved? Probably, we don't know, but would it be great to see an approach that deals with coastal protection, that deals with infrastructural resiliency and redundancies that nowadays, for reasons that we all know, are impossible to even think. I mean, it's when you put in perspective not just the cost of it, but the sort of impact on the survival of the culture. It seems to me that it could be an absolutely wonderful thing to think that maybe all of this needs a more holistic view, something that doesn't really learn from the failures of the previous code, but something that actually deals at a planning level with a country that, large as it is and important as it is, still is the size of California. We have how many? 51 more of those, right? I mean, it's just.
Cliff, did you want to say something before?
I think the critical question that faces Japan right now, I mean, the amazing thing and the optimistic thing that we learned is that the engineering of buildings can deal remarkably well with seismic issues. The bad news was there's not much you can do with a tsunami. And I think the critical question now is not only how you build or what you build, but it's where you build. So once you make a decision to put a nuclear power plant that close to the coast, that was the most critical decision. And once that was made, the fate of those nuclear power plants was pretty much sealed. Mm-hmm. So the question now is, where do they build?
Well, can I just, since I like a little bit of controversy, I don't think that this is a question of choice. I mean, these people essentially build where they can. It's not a question of just the logic of thinking. I mean, perhaps that's the reason why I'm saying that the response is a response that has a dimension that goes beyond, say, for instance, secondary structures in a building and how you learn about the fact that you've paid after COVID too much attention to the basic frame and too little to the supports. Supports can kill you the same way than the large frame. I mean, obviously, probably less numbers. But it seems to me that the problem now is not to design for the, what is it that you said, something like 160 years or 1,000-year ratio? I mean, you know, this force is something that some statistical mind can put in a period of, I don't know, 500 years, for whatever that's worth. But it just happened 2 months ago, right? I mean, you know, who cares about 5,000 years? The question is, are we just thinking, or are you thinking, that the problem is a micro solution or is a macro solution? I mean, you know, we all know, I mean, I saw Kobe from the air while the fires couldn't be stopped. And that's something that, in a place which is so conscious and so careful about these things, it says something about the realm which is not the individual realm of the developer, be it the government or a private sector. It is an infrastructural problem. I mean, and I, for one, think that, you know, wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful if somebody thought that probably the tsunami effect could also be controlled? Because that's what engineers, you guys have been doing this thing for 3,000 years or 6,000. Not me. Not you. Well, it looks like if you were doing it for 3,000. But what I'm saying is that level of thinking, the level of thinking that there is a challenge that could only be addressed by a national effort on behalf of the nation. I mean, not right. Sort of like a massive public, that's what I meant with.
Let me just throw this one thing out there is the government has actually set this plan to the Sanriku Kokuritsu Koen, which means the coastal, to make this kind of coastal government park, because it's a territory with tsunami, everyone knows it's dangerous, and they're actually planning to make that all governmental park. But I mean, this is the scale you're talking about of like more.
What happens if it happens on the other side?
But what does this relate to, going back to this problem of density and low density? Like, does that just generate more low density, or is that, how can that be kind of reincorporated or rethought in the scope of high density? Because again, is that
higher?
It would be higher because it's...
Because you made a park. I mean, it's an equation, right? I mean, it's a question of density, number of people over the footprint. Less footprint, more density. You have the same number of people, there will be even more inventive ways of dealing with building in elevation, which is also something that, as we all remember from the 60s, was actually remarkably well addressed by the metabolists, right? I mean, you know, these were the first people that started thinking that way, and it is a complete consequence of their environment and the cultural environment. I think that from Japan now, a friend of mine told me that this is an opportunity to rekindle or reignite the economy. I think this guy is very good and very smart, so probably he's not wrong. It doesn't seem to be the case so far. But
could you please talk a little more, Mike?
Yes, I can talk to them. But what I'm saying is that the opportunity now is an opportunity to really talk about the environment beyond the disciplines, beyond the design discipline, beyond the construction discipline, beyond the specialties about environmental control, water quality, traffic planning. You got to think about the physical place as something